Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you're very welcome to the Great Hall here at Queen's University Belfast for the launch of the book by Reverend Harold Good, In Good Time, a Memoir. So a special welcome, of course, to the man of the hour, Reverend Harold himself. You'll be hearing more about him shortly. A warm welcome to our guest speaker this evening, former Pro-Chancellor of Queen's University Belfast, former President of Ireland, current Chancellor of Trinity, and many other titles after name, Professor Mary McAleese. Harold's co-author, Martin O'Brien, again, a former member of Senate here at Queen's, so you'll see a bit of a theme running throughout the evening. And our MC for this evening, Brian Rowan. And we have representatives of Red Stripes, the publisher, here this evening. And I would say that Harold did us an honour by asking Queen's if he could host this event. And he said that he'd be inviting some friends and family. And as you can see from the room, Harold has a lot of friends and family. So you're all very welcome here to the Great Hall tonight. It won't come as any surprise to anybody in this room or the thousands across this island and beyond that there are many people that would love to have been here this evening and who would love to have been here to celebrate the phenomenal life's work of building peace and reconciliation of Harold Good. It was a year and a half ago now that all of us came together here and people from right across the globe to mark 25 years of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And we owe a great debt of gratitude to everyone who put a lot of hard work into the negotiations around the agreement, a lot of people who covered the agreement in terms of media, Barney and others, a lot of people that did a lot of work to sustain the peace process. Harold was one of those people, and he was a constant thread throughout the entire peace process, which makes tonight more of an honour to have him here in the Great Hall with us. You'll hear from other speakers this evening that Harold had an indispensable role in the peace process, so I'm not going to go into any more detail on that other than to say this university is extremely proud to have Harold Good as an honorary graduate. I'm extremely proud to have Harold Good as a friend and a counsel, and we're very lucky and honoured that he decided to come here and do this event with us here tonight. So on behalf of the entire Queen's community, the wider community at large, we're honoured and delighted to have all of you here this evening for this very important book launch, and I hope that you'll all be picking up a copy later. So I'm delighted now to hand over to our MC this evening, a man who needs no introduction, Brian Rowan.
Thanks so much, Rand, and thank you, Harold, for trusting me with this event this evening. I was with Harold in the High Street in Hollywood only a matter of a few days ago when a woman joined our company and put her hand in his and said, "Thank you for all that you've done for us." And then she just walked off and left us. But I think tonight, Harold, is a much bigger thank you to you, that Urco has come here from the Basque Country, that so many of your friends and colleagues throughout the years are with you. It's all of them saying thank you. I see Professor McLaughlin here, Dr. Hartley. I think I saw Sylvia Herman just, I see you, Sylvia, how are you doing? So many people wanting to be here to say thank you to someone who made such a huge contribution to this process over many years. I think William Crawley, if he was here, would also say thank you for providing him with so much content for his programs in recent days. But I was thinking just this morning about your role, about how peace takes special people. The process of making peace takes special people, those who are prepared to take risks, to go to different and difficult places, to go there quite often ahead of politicians, to engage in very difficult conversations and compromises, and to make paths for others. So we've been waiting for this book, Harold. We've been urging you and coaxing you to write it for yourself, to write it for your family, for Clodagh, for the kids, for the grandchildren, and we see the family tree when we turn a page from the cover to the inside of the book, and we all know how much family means to you, how important family is, how it's the family who have carried the weights for those who have been so involved, like yourself, in processes like this, and not just here in Ireland. Harold, we know that your help has been needed both in the Basque Country and Colombia and elsewhere, and that says an awful lot about the trust that people have in you and for you. I mentioned William Crawley in that interview just a few days ago. And if a book says nothing, Harold, it's not a book. And I was mentioning on Talkback today that the Quiet Dialogues that you were a part of are now 20 plus years ago. And we have people coming to this place every day and every week to talk to us about how we made the peace, and they come looking for hope. And I think to tell that story without that reference to the Quiet Dialogues, the importance of creating space for people to come into rooms and to talk with each other and to think their way through that path and that journey from conflict into peace, then we're leaving a big part of that story out of the equation and out of the context. So it's important that people know that there were those who engaged in dialogues that became the roots out of which the ceasefires and the political agreement and agreements have grown. So it may have caused a little bit of political unease. I'm sure many people in the room will have had a quick flick through your index. I hope you're all sitting comfortably, and more comfortably than some have been sitting over the last couple of days. But all of that will pass, Harold. All of that will pass. Politics one day becomes a different politics the next day. Martin O'Brien, when he was co-writing this book with you, asked me for a comment that could be included inside the cover. And I say there are many people who talk about peace, and then there are those who make peace. And what is your contribution to the journey that this place is on? That you help save lives. You know, and that's something that I don't say without thinking about it. You help the decommissioning process move from that position of not a bullet, not an ounce, to being involved with Father Alec Reid in those acts of decommissioning, witnessing those acts of decommissioning in September 2005. Guns being put beyond use, guns being taken out of the frame. And I think that's what I mean about saving lives, helping us to make the peace. So that's how we know you, and it's how history will remember you. As someone who took the difficult steps forward, led the way, helped others, helped make those paths, and took that work beyond this island to places elsewhere. So we owe you a huge debt of gratitude for all of that. I'm just going to ask Michael Brennan, the publisher of the book, to say a few words now. Martin O'Brien, the co-author of the book, is going to say a few words, and we all realize we're the warm-up act for former President McAleese, who will be the main speaker of the evening. So is Michael, here, Michael's just beside us. Michael Brennan.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. Former Uachtaráin Mary, Vice President of Queen's Ryan, distinguished guests, of which there are many, ladies and gentlemen, I promise to be brief. I am Michael Brennan of Red Stripe Press, and on my own behalf and on behalf of Jerry Kelly, co-owner of Red Stripe, I am delighted to be here this evening in the beautiful, historic surroundings of the Great Hall to join with Harold and with Martin and their families in celebrating the launch of Harold's memoir, In Good Time. Looking around the hall and the crowd assembled, I think it is very much a measure of the esteem in which Harold is held. I'm also delighted that Dr Mary McAleese, of whom I have to say I'm a huge fan, is here to launch the book this evening. This memoir, as has been said already, I'm sure you'll agree, has been a long time coming. The great mystery is how, between them, Harold and Martin managed to fit everything within the covers of a single volume. We at Red Stripe Press are very proud to be associated with Harold and with Martin, and we are honoured that they should have bestowed upon us the privilege of publishing in good time. I hope that they are pleased with the job that we have done, or at least tried to do. I say we, although I have very little to do with the real work. All of that is down to our managing editor, Eileen O'Brien. She's not going to like me for this, but you have to stand up, Eileen, and reveal yourself. Between them, the two O'Briens, Eileen and Martin, took Harold's text and worked it into the volume that is being launched here this evening. As publishers, our job is only half complete. We must now do everything in our power to make sure that In Good Time becomes the success that it deserves to be, particularly for Harold. That task begins this evening. Fiona Kelly is on hand with copies of In Good Time to sell with a smile, and I'm sure both Harold and Martin will be happy to sign your copies. And I'll leave you with this. Last week, when I handed Harold at least, the first copy of his book, Harold confided that waiting to finally see it in print brought him back to the day he awaited his A-level results. As I drove back to Dublin later, I thought about what Harold had said. I thought about what this book means to him. I thought about Harold's many achievements as a church leader and as a voice of reason, particularly in darker times. I thought about the pivotal role he had played in the peace process. And I was reminded of how rewarding the publishing industry to which I belong can sometimes be. Many thanks for listening. Thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Martin O'Brien, the co-author of the book, is someone who I've known for many, many years. First as editor of the Irish News, and then when he came to join us in the BBC. And I think Harold's been very fortunate to have been in the hands of Martin, with a bit of advice also from one of my colleagues, Mervyn Jess, who I think is somewhere in the audience this evening. So Martin is now going to tell us and speak to us a few words about the challenge of putting the Harold Good story into a few hundred pages. Martin O'Brien.
Airuchthron, Dr McAleese, Vice President Feeney. Thank you, Michael and Brian, for your very kind words, and thank you all for coming along this evening to share in this moment of great joy and of great thanksgiving that we have at long last Harold's memoirs between the covers of this book in good time. A special word of thanks to Mary and to Martin for travelling from Roscommon via Dublin to be here this evening. Mary, your immediate yes to my request to you to launch this book, and your presence here this evening means more than I or Harold can say. And this occasion evokes happy memories of our time back in the day working together on the Queen's Senate. And I'd also like to say a public word to our publisher, Michael Brennan of Red Stripe Press. Now, those of you who have any knowledge or have aspirations around book writing will know just how difficult it can be to find a publisher. Michael, without you, we would not be here this evening. I can never thank you enough for immediately expressing faith in this book when we spoke and met for the first time just 5.5 months ago back in May. And it's just remarkable how you moved so quickly and so decisively to produce this book at pace. My gratitude to you, to your incredible editor, Eileen O'Brien, and delighted Eileen that you're here this evening, and to your fellow director, Jerry Kelly, who printed this book. My gratitude is heartfelt, indeed infinite. And I'd like to thank Ryan Feeney and Maurice McCartney and all those at Queen's who have been so generous in making this evening possible. You could not have done more. Thank you. Now, as I wrote in the introduction to In Good Time, being invited by Harold to partner him in this odyssey over the past 5 years and 5 months has been one of the privileges of my life. And I'm delighted that all this has happened, all this has renewed my long relationship with Queen's. For it was 51 years ago, in October 1973, that I arrived as a fresh-faced fresher from Fermanagh, here in the hallowed halls of Queen's University Belfast. And one of my lecturers in English literature was the brilliant Dr. Edna Longley. And I don't know if Dr. Longley and Michael are here this evening, but I'm delighted that and I have to recommend Michael's latest collection, Ash Keys, which was launched in this very room just last month. And Edna, it was, you introduced me to the immortal war poetry of Edward Thomas. And when we spoke a few weeks ago, I updated you on the book about Harold. And we looked forward to this evening, and you introduced me to something else, to the idea of, wait for it, and this was new to me, so I hope I've got it right, the idea of nominative determinism. Now, I knew what nominative meant, and as a past student of scholastic philosophy, I knew a little about determinism. I'd never just put them together. Well, it's the idea that people tend to manifest virtues or traits related to their names. Well, if ever there was a person who embodied the idea of nominative determinism, it is Harold. And for Harold is good in name and good in nature. And tonight, we not just celebrate the publication of his memoirs, but we're blessed that he and Clodagh, his great support, are here so that we can thank him for his prophetic contribution to our country down the decades. Now, nursing, cajoling, driving along this book with Harold has been one of the signal experiences of my life, and the end product, this magnificent, actually 381-page production, counting prelims and photos, has more than compensated for all the years of interviewing and transcribing and researching and writing and rewriting and so on. And Harold, all the toing and froing and the emails, and I think around 2,000 emails, and God knows how many texts and WhatsApp and late-night phone calls at all hours of the day and night. And it has probably been the most prolonged and most intense and most focused professional and deeply personal engagement I have had with anyone in my life. An engagement that was conducted with never an angry word, one based on the virtues of mutual trust and respect that Harold champions in this book. Always a professional relationship, but one that deepened quickly into great friendship and thanksgiving for Harold's giftedness. Thank you, Harold and Clodagh, for your friendship and your hospitality on numerous visits to your home. And I must also say how much this endeavour has enriched me, a Christian of the Roman Catholic faith, in giving me such a deep insight into the Methodist charism and that of its founder, John Wesley. Before Harold, before Harold called me to do this, I did not know that Wesley was an ecumenical pioneer. The research that I undertook before writing the first draft of chapter 8, The one entitled A People Called Methodists, Who and What We Seek to Be, I found very fulfilling, and this is something that I will particularly cherish. Now, much has already been written and broadcast about the political revelations in this book, but there is so much more within its 16 chapters, bookended by a significant prologue and a challenging epilogue and 12 pages index, much more for the media, including the BBC and others. And I think of programs like Sunday Sequence, to interrogate and to discuss, including questions for the churches, questions for the media itself, and issues around conflict resolution, international religious freedom, racism, and sectarianism. Now, I will, if I may, single out one aspect that has touched me deeply. It is how Harold recalls the stories of unrecorded and forgotten victims and survivors of the euphemistically termed Troubles, who he helped in the worst of times, sometimes endangering himself, and how they just happened to miraculously turn up in his life decades later to thank him. And there are several instances of this, and I've only time to mention a couple very briefly. There's the story of the Dublin journalist whom Harold saved from an angry mob, but whose life was devastated by his experience, and who decades later contacted him to say thank you for saving his life. Then there's the story of the Hannah family, including 2 young grandchildren, driven out of their home by a sectarian mob in 1969 in a scene right out of Kenneth Branagh's movie Belfast, whom Harold put up in his church hall as refugees. I'll read just one brief paragraph from page 75. Quote, "On the afternoon of the 11th of November 2022, I was in the Tesco store at Knocknagoney when a man came up to me and said, 'Hello, are you Reverend Good?' It was David, the second Hannah grandson. Meeting him after half a century was deeply moving. 'Where have all the years gone?' he cried. He just wanted to thank me for all that he had done for his family during the terrible events of his childhood, and we both promised to have a proper catch-up. I relate this as yet one more unrecorded story of personal tragedy and loss, not included amongst the official records of victims of the Troubles, and how many more could be told," unquote. Now, I don't think either Harold or myself quite knew what we were letting ourselves in for when we embarked on this project. Writing a book is no respecter of so-called work-life balance or even summer holidays or indeed any holidays. And finally, and very importantly, I would like to say this. I would not have survived, and there would be no book tonight, without the unfailing support of Katie, my wife, my eternal rock, who endured my interminable absences in the study and on the phone. Katie really regrets that she cannot be here tonight. She's recovering in hospital, thank God, from an illness. And Katie, I know you'll hear a recording of this sometime. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And our daughter Christina is also here. Thank you, Christina, for your support when the going got tough. Enjoy the book. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I had a laugh to myself when you said that Harold had invited you to write the book. Harold doesn't invite anyone to do anything. He tells us what we're doing. He rang me to say, I need you at Queen's on October the 30th. And it was be there. It wasn't, can you do it? And in our house, my wife Val says if Harold asks you to do something, the answer is yes. And that's a response to, Harold, what you have done for us and all that you've done for us. I know that you wouldn't want tonight to pass without reference to some of those from the different churches who journeyed with you. Ken Newell, John Dunlop, David Porter, Heather Morris at a different time, Leslie Carroll, Martin McGill I see in the audience here this evening. And Tom Hartley wrote recently about those church people as the early peacemakers who became part of what he called the Clonard House Rule. He made reference to the British having the Chatham House Rule, but in our peace process we had the Clonard House Rule, and it was a reference to those church people who took steps ahead of the political posse. Our next speaker tonight is the former president, Mary McAleese, and what a presidency that was in terms of both leadership, but also in the many examples we were shown of what reconciliation should look like. People that you had visit you, Mary, friendships that were built across the communities here in the north. So we're delighted to have you. I said that the rest of us were here as the warm-up act. So, former President Mary McAleese.
Harold, Ryan, Martin, Brian, and guests. This is just a lovely, lovely interlude in a life, isn't it? When a life is gathered in a book, and bits of that life that we thought we knew are now put together with bits of that life that we did not know. And now we have the jigsaw puzzle that allows us to answer a lot of questions about how it was this man came to be the man who did so much to reconcile in a place where reconciliation was a long and thorny and sometimes impossible-looking road. There are also other impossibilities here. 2 nights ago, or 2 days ago, I think it was, I got a phone call from Martin, his collaborator, saying, I was talking to Harold today, and he had a couple of things he wanted to say to you. One of them is, this incidentally was after I had written the speech for tonight. Harold doesn't want you to mention him. And I said, he does know the books about him. I mean, who wrote this book? It's called a memoir. Yeah, I know, but he'd rather you talked about the book than about him. I said, but he's in the book. Like, he's everywhere in the book. So Harold, just relax now, because I'm going to be talking about you whether you like it or whether you don't. And we know he is the kind of man doesn't like to be talked about. But he's going to be talked about tonight. So here goes. Michael, you mentioned when you were here at this podium that when you gave the book into Harold's hands, it reminded him of the day when he got his A-level results. So I want to take us all back to that day, because it wasn't too far from here. Because it was in August of 1955 that a very prescient and very intuitive headmaster of Methodist College, just across the road from here, wrote a valedictory reference for the 18-year-old Harold Good, who was about to leave Methodist College, having done well in his A-levels. And Harold's about to head out into the world, and probably many of us here remember that day in our own lives, the whole unwritten life ahead of us. But he's about to be tried and tested, forge a career, put his mark on the world. And he himself in the memoir says how very uncertain he was about his own abilities and how much it meant to him when he read the words of the headmaster who'd had a chance over many years to assess this young man. And here's what the headmaster said. I believe Harold to be a sincere, upright, and thoughtful young man, fit to undertake responsible work and genuinely interested in the welfare of others. It's a pretty good summation, isn't it, at 18? Could have been a pretty good summation if you took out the word young man, just young, not putting any other word in there. But it would fit even today. Because looking back along the sweep of Harold's long and often drama-filled life, we can say that those words have been truly vindicated. And we who are gathered here are among the many who have benefited hugely from his life of service in the welfare of others, his sincerity, his uprightness, his thoughtfulness, and in particular the contribution he made to that noble but very fraught cause of peace here in our common and contested homeland. In this place where conflicting politico-religious identities too often raised fears and barriers between people who were actually neighbours to one another, left us in abysmal ignorance of one another and abysmal fear at times of one another, Harold, by God's good grace, became that remarkable and rare phenomenon, an adult who, in his own words, never consciously adopted either a nationalist or unionist identity, and so was enabled, in his words, to feel entirely comfortable and at home with people of both traditions. His capacity then to navigate the vanities, the fears, the hurts, the woundedness, the distrusts, the hatreds that kept hell going among those neighbours for so long and at such a ridiculous cost. It's not a Pollyanna story. I mean, to read this book, it's not a book written in a Pollyanna language, quite the reverse. As it's revealed, it's a narrative of just sheer hard slog and determination. Courage, yes, definitely. Compassion, yes, surely, but determination. And it was driven in his case by this unerring commitment that he made as a young man to his calling as a Christian minister, to be a witness to the power of the great commandment to love one another. If over the difficult years of the conflict we wondered where Harold got the steady nerve and the ability to take all sides with him, then some of the answers are revealed in the book, and they're a story worth reading. It was actually heartbreaking. One of the parts of the book that I found quite heartbreaking was to read of his father, who had also been a president of the Methodist Church, but his father's very early visionary efforts to galvanize all the church leaders in a joint effort to head off what was then the erupting sectarian dangers that he could foresee. And I thought too of the courage of his father in meeting representatives of the Republican leadership way back in 1959. So if you wonder where Harold got his vocation from, you'll see that in the story of his own father. We could say of his father that nothing came of those noble efforts, because tragically they did not mobilize the spirit of Christian collaboration between church leaders that he hoped for. But it didn't matter, did it? Because in the end the seeds were sown in his son, and he was not about to let them be stillborn. And he it was who produced that crop of peacemakers and peacemaking that was harvested in what we call the peace process. Any of you who have seen Owen McCafferty's brilliant play, The Agreement, which tells of the final tormented days and hours leading up to the Good Friday Agreement, you'll have seen the sheer exhausting passion and intensity and deliberations and argumentations, the endless talks, the endless discussions, the finessing, the threats, all of that, all the wildly differing perspectives that somehow, God knows how, but were eventually fused and melded into the historic compromise that allowed peace to break out. So you'll know, just even in those few hours spent in the theatre, just of the sheer intensity, the exhausting intensity of peacemaking. But in Harold's book, we get an insight into the years and years and years that preceded 1998, way back for decades, the quiet, painstaking efforts to build bridges across glaring chasms between neighbours who characterised a divided society. And if you've been listening to the news in the last couple of days, Harold, in which you have featured rather large, you'll realise that to cross those chasms for a lot of people was monumentally difficult. And he and Clodagh, his terrific life partner, from very early on in their relationship, they showed just that spirit of openness and hospitality, but also a spirit of adventure, in which was infused this certainty of God, this trust in God's goodness. And it was that capacity for openness and hospitality that allowed their home to be a place where people encountered each other who over their dead bodies would ever admit to encountering each other. And they encountered each other in a way that allowed them to feel respected and comfortable and not on edge, not nervy, not fearful. Clodagh and Harold brought that openness back with them, it has to be said, from their experiences in the United States, and that's brilliantly catalogued in the book, how they lived through the civil rights movement in the United States and the impact that that had on their thinking. And we benefited hugely from that. In page after page, we read of Harold's relentless trudge through the sludge of impenetrable sectarian politics, paramilitary violence, and his work to bring unlikely people who, as I said, over their dead bodies would meet, to bring them into an encounter with the other. So within the work that he did within Methodism, we can see now as seminal to bringing people into that encounter. Methodism itself, the Methodist Church, taking great risks at a time when that was not popular, possibly even within Methodism. I think too of talking a couple of years ago to Pat Hume, and she telling me about the response within her own community and her own family to the talks that were ongoing between John Hume and Jerry Adams, that were, of course, hosted by your great friend, your wonderful friend and my dear mentor, Father Alec Reid. And talking about how, as soon as he came home from any of those meetings, he was met on all sides by people who thought this was a ridiculous thing to be doing. This was not the right thing to be doing. Father Alec the same, even in the monastery, some of his colleagues telling him this is the wrong thing to be doing. And they believing with passion in the rightness of it. And Harold, you had days like that too. You had many days like that too. People who would tell you that what you were doing was the wrong thing. And yet, it was always the right thing, as we now know. It takes leaders, doesn't it, to push out into the deep, to make it to the farther shore, to show us we will not drown if we too decide to follow. And that's what you have done. You've helped us to follow to the farther shore. It's no accident that one of the most remarkable Christian witnesses to emerge from the period of the Troubles, whose story is also catalogued in the book, is that of the wonderful Senator Gordon Wilson, whose extraordinarily well-honed Christian instincts allowed him instantly to forgive those who murdered his beautiful daughter in the evil event that was November 1987, when the IRA bombed the Enniskillen Cenotaph. Right across all the outrage and all the grief, that voice of Gordon Wilson's cut right through, and it challenged so many people, the churchgoers, the people who were the Bible readers, the people who had so often rehearsed the great commandment to love one another. And God knows if ever a man was tested in his faith, it was Gordon, just as you have been tested. But to cut through it and say, yes, but I believe in the power of forgiveness and I believe in the power of love. I think those words were a huge challenge that hung in the air for a very long time. And it was you, Harold, who allowed us to take those words and to really insist that we put them into action in our own lives. Or do not make the claim of Christian ownership. Somehow, like Harold, Gordon put that big question out there. God knows this community had its faith tested over and over and over again many times, and righteous anger often got in the way, too often got in the way. But somehow we needed people to show us it is possible to be brothers and sisters to each other. It is possible to be family, to be community to one another. It is possible. It is actually possible to love, not hate, to respect, not be full of contempt, to seek friendship, not fear. But somebody had to show us how to do it. And they had to survive in the doing of it. And that was you and Clodagh. That was you. That was the life you subscribed to and gave in service. Look, there's never been an easy answer to the question of can we build those relationships? Can we sustain them? Can we develop them? Can we embed them? Can we make them the future? But there is an answer. It's not an easy answer, but the answer is found in part in the principles and values and structures that are now in the Good Friday Agreement, in the St. Andrews Agreement. But in reality, in back of that, what we need is the energy that comes from the commitment to and the belief in goodness and decency, in the goodness and decency of the other, that the other is someone we can live with. Actually, someone we can't live without, because without we don't have community. We have to live together. Today, the old culture of instability with the default position of violence and suspicion of the other, thankfully, is evaporating. It's fading, giving way now to liberation from old fears, as peace and shared government, parity of esteem, equality of citizenship underpin a whole new confidence and way of being. We see the growth of a whole new culture, and that's a really healthy thing. This is, I think, a healthier place than at any time in its history. And if it is thanks to people who made themselves the hands of God's work. There were many who did that, but there were few with such a formidable and commendable legacy as the man who co-wrote the memoir that we are here tonight to launch. Harold's received many awards over the years, but I'm so glad that his memoir allows a much wider audience now to understand the depth and the breadth of the work he did, because it wasn't just here. There's the work he did, for example, in the Basque Country, celebrated here tonight with our friend from the Basque Country who has made the journey to be with us. The work that he did in Colombia, meeting with FARC, people who nobody wanted to talk to, but had to be talked to if there was ever to be a resolution. And the courage that took to place yourself in that space where no one else wants to go, that's a very difficult thing. And to be comforted in that by a family who constantly gave you the support and the energy to keep going. The scones, the cups of tea, it's amazing what you can manage to wring out of a cup of tea and a scone. I should know that because for 14 years in Arasanoke as president, and I'm still living with the consequences, Martin and I ate for Ireland, and we sat down many times with people of very, very different perspectives over a cup of tea and a scone, not talking hard talk, but talking, how could we build friendship and build the kind of friendships that will allow us sometime to talk the hard talk and not have the relationship break down. And that's what Harold managed to do, to focus on building the relationship, making those relationships strong enough, intelligent enough, intuitive enough about each other, that when the real hard talk had to be talked, people did not walk away because they felt they were among strangers, but stayed because they were among people whom they knew and knew were always going to be neighbours. When I think actually scones and cups of tea were a heck of a lot more powerful in the end than any of those weapons that you managed to put beyond use. The commissioning of love, the decommissioning of hatred, that's been your mission. That's been your mission. And I hope that a new generation will read this book, will relish it, and will commit themselves to the work of peace building, because we are still engaged in building peace. You know, it's a big turn you have to make when you're turning a big, big ship. And we're on the turn, we're well on the turn. But there's still a lot to be done. There's a culture to be built, to embed it, to make it solid, to make it stable, to make sure of it. And I hope that in this book, they'll find the roadmap to what needs to be done. It is, after all, peace building is the work of generations. And someone has to do it, but not everyone does. In this book, we see what it takes to be a peacemaker par excellence, but the happiness that comes from it. Because the one thing I will say about Harold, on all the occasions I have met him, I never met him unhappy or miserable. He's one of the happiest, most joyful men I have ever met. He radiates joy. He radiates joy. And that joy comes from his innate goodness and his love of people. He just loves meeting others, getting to know them. And in the doing of that simple act of getting to know others around a table, around a cup of tea, it's remarkable. It's remarkable what grew from that. What grew from that was simply things that were very, very good indeed. Yes, very good indeed. Gormila Magad.
Thank you, Mary. And I think what we hear in all of what you said is this remarkable ability of this man to bring people together. And I witnessed that many years ago. Harold was speaking in a Philanthropic event in Martin McGill's church, I think in Lenadoon, Martin, at that stage. Yeah. Speaking on grace, and Gerry Adams stood to publicly thank Harold for his contribution to the peace process. And Alan McBride was in the church that evening and spoke to Harold about wanting to speak with Gerry Adams there and then. And Harold explaining to him that that wasn't the moment. And a few days later, speaking with Alan, myself speaking with Alan, telling me that he'd been to Harold's house to speak with Gerry Adams about the Shankill bomb, about what happened that day, the wrong of that day. And Harold later telling me it was one of the most uncomfortable conversations that he had witnessed, one of the most difficult conversations that he'd witnessed. And yet he had brought those two men together. And he's got this remarkable ability to speak with people. Val and I were walking through Ballycastle only a couple of years ago with our granddaughter, this size, and we bump into him. And the next minute he's on his knees speaking to Aoife at Aoife's level. So it is a remarkable achievement, Harold, what you've done for this place. And I was thinking also there as I listened that when you dig in the rubble looking for bodies, which you did on the Shankill Road, you come to appreciate the importance of peace and the importance of taking the gun out of Irish politics, which 30 years ago seemed an unthinkable possibility, and yet it was achieved. He's become a great friend of mine. The first time I spoke to him was the day after decommissioning, or a couple of days after decommissioning in September 2005. I took a run down the road to speak to him, thinking he would colour in all of the detail of the Decommissioning Act for me. I found out very quickly that his cranes don't go beyond the lines of confidentiality. And we know in his book that there are some things that he is not prepared to talk about. But this is a book of learning, a book that will be a remarkable contribution to the history of this place. I think of the great peacemakers, those who made our process possible, who are no longer with us and who left us without their thoughts on paper. So Harold, we appreciate what you've done for us. This is your audience tonight, your chance now to chat with them. And this is what we've all come for, to hear from you. Harold Good.
Unaccustomed as I am, I know you'll not take that too seriously, but there are moments when you really aren't quite sure what to say, when you are a bit lost for words, and this is such a moment. To begin with, the attendance tonight speaks so much. People standing at the back as well as sitting comfortably at the front. It's overwhelming just to see so many people, and particularly what a wonderfully diverse and representative group of people gathered in this place. People from different communities, or different parts of our community, as I prefer to say, different traditions within Christian faith community, and some from none. And here we are all together, sharing in this particular moment, which is very personal for me, but not just personal, because to me it reflects the community, the homeland, whatever part of it you're from, which is what we dream of and what we long for. Thank you all for being here. And thank you for Queen's. Thank you, Ryan, for the generous hospitality, and Morris, who did the nuts and bolts of putting this together this evening. I'm truly humbled by the welcome and by the generosity and the way in which you have hosted this event. All of you in this room are, in some way or another, you are the book. Whether you find your name in the index or not. You know, I think a lot of people, when they go into a bookshop after a book like this, first thing they look for is the index to see if their name is in it. Some of you will find your name there, and I hope you don't mind that. I hope you will maybe be pleased to find your name there. Others may be a little bit disappointed that their name isn't there, but come on, could I put all your names into the index? We'd have had a few more pages, and the publisher might have had a question about that. But many of you are there even though you are not named, because you are a part of this book. You're a part of this story. You're a part of this journey. So even if your name has not been printed, you are, and you are dear friends, dear companions of the way. And I cherish your friendships. I cherish your trust. I cherish the times we have had together. And I cherish most of all that even after we had fulfilled some of the responsibilities that were given to us, both in this process and in other areas of life, we have sustained those friendships. And they're very dear to me and to Clodagh, and we cherish them deeply. Over the years, many of us here have shared many journeys. Some of those journeys are recorded in the book. Journeys that took us to unfamiliar places. Journeys that we shared with people that we didn't know so well until we'd been sharing those journeys. They were very important journeys. And I'm not thinking of any one of them in particular. And some of them were, actual geographic journeys. Others were spiritual journeys. And others were searching journeys. Sometimes we didn't quite know where we were going and where the journey would take us. But we trusted each other on those journeys. They were shared journeys. And I deeply appreciate the fact that those journeys continue as they are. Now, speaking of journeys, several of you here have made quite long journeys to be here. Indeed, I had thought of maybe we could offer a prize, Martin, to whoever had come the farthest to be here. And, I thought, well, my dear cousin and his family from Kilkenny, I thought, well, that's a fairly long journey. And I do appreciate very much your being here, Vivian. And then I got a phone call from my grandson, Christopher, from Manchester. Said, "Grandad, I'm coming to your book launch." And I thought, somebody from another generation wanting to take time out at the expense. Maybe he's looking for a contribution towards the fair. But I really cherished that, one of my grandchildren wanted to come from Manchester. And I thought, well, he'll be in the running for this prize. And then I heard there were some friends coming from Bath. And I tried to work out which was further, Bath or Manchester. It was getting very difficult to decide who's going to get this prize. And then I thought, we have it now. My dear friend Urko from the Basque Country, down here, he phoned to say he was coming. And Urko, I'm so pleased. And I thought, the prize is in the pocket. And then the O'Briens heard about this. And the O'Briens, not to be outdone, they imported their cousins, Joe and Terry, from Virginia. How about that? Getting one up. Well, I've been profoundly honored by your presence here, but none more than by the presence of Mary and Martin McAleese. I'm humbled as well as honored. We've had a friendship going back quite some time, a friendship which I have certainly cherished. Your hospitality, your friendship, your wisdom, the way you keep arriving in things and places that, you have chosen to come to, and unexpected places. And your words tonight, well, thank you so much. You have been a headline for us all in the whole search for peace on this island and across these islands, not just within this island, but across the Irish Sea. You have done so much, and thank you. And Martin, he's the kind of person you don't know an awful lot about what he's been up to, but there are those of you in this room tonight, because he has hosted you in some interesting places, and maybe your game wasn't as good as his, but that gives a hint. But thank you so much. And now, and I cannot let the evening go without thanking my co-author, Martin O'Brien. Thank you, Martin, for your professional expertise, your friendship, and your patience. And we are so sorry that Katie could not be here, because I know how patient she has been as you shared in this journey and in this task. And we send our love and our thoughts and our prayers to Katie tonight, and hope that she'll be home again very soon. Now that we have completed this task, Martin, I don't know, I'm going to miss those 10 phone calls a day. I'll not miss the ones at night, nor will Clodagh, because every time the phone rang, she said, "Oh, there's Martin, he's looking for you again." And we knew, somehow there was something about your phone, we knew the ring. And, but please, in the acknowledgement page of the book, read my fuller and more comprehensive appreciation of what Martin has brought to this task. And also, along with that, will you please read my appreciation to my very good friend, my coffee mate, Brian Rowan. It was he who kept me at this book, so blame him. He kept saying, "Come on, when are you going to get it? How's it going?" Every time we'd meet, "Where are you now in this book?" And gosh, he's a hard taskmaster. But seriously, Brian, thank you, not just for your coffee, but for your friendship and your companionship, your encouragement, and your good counsel, which is always honest as well as gracious. There are many others. When going to write a book, you discover you are dependent on many people. But without Martin and Brian, there would be no book. In spite of the fact that there was many people who kept saying to me, very often when I would go to speak at something, people say, when are we going to get the book? When are you going to write the book? And I'd say, what book? And they'd say, come on. But it was Martin and Brian who helped to become a reality. And thank you, Mervyn Jess. I think you're somewhere down there as well. Mervyn was a bit like my English teacher at school. Mervyn would read through and give me some good ideas as to my parsing, my grammar, my full stops, and particularly my exclamation marks. Yeah, I love putting exclamation marks in book. And it was something, I keep putting exclamation marks in. Mervyn rubbed them all out. He said, no, you don't need all that nonsense. But I really appreciate, Mervyn, your help. And without our publisher, and Martin has already spoken to Michael Brennan, and how much we appreciate his encouragement. We met one morning in the Culloden Hotel, wondering would this man have the slightest interest in our book. And before we left, within a very, very short time, we had shaken hands on it. And thank you for that readiness. And Eileen, you see, Eileen is your editor. And if any of you have written a book, you'll know that there's always an unseen editor somewhere. And I had a mental picture. I don't know how many dozens of phone calls that I've had with Eileen and emails, and I had a mental picture of Eileen. Apologies, Eileen. You don't look a thing like the image that I had, and I'm very glad of that. I'm so pleased that you're nothing like what I thought you would look like. And, it was Eamon Malley. Eamon's somewhere here tonight, I imagine. Eamon who said to me, Harold, about writing a book, you'll wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and you'll think of something that you wish you hadn't said, or you think of something you should say, even when you're close up to the time of publication. And I did. I had those moments. And then I would ring Eileen and I'd say, Eileen, any chance we could just change that, or could we get this in or get that? And I always was fearful because this image I had of an editor, I was so, she was always so gracious. Yeah, no problem. We'll do that. No problem. No. And thank you for all of that, Eileen. Well, last, but by no means least, thank you to Clodagh and our family. I've dedicated this book to her and to them. And I also have an apology. You also have to have an apology in a book, and I have an apology to them, which I have made very public. Sorry that you didn't get as much of my time as you should. Please forgive me for that, and maybe now you'll understand why my time was sometimes taken up in so many other directions. Clodagh, my companion for the last 60 years, just celebrating our 60 years of marriage. What a way to celebrate it. I have resisted the temptation of revealing another secret. I had to kind of struggle with this idea of confidentiality. And one of the biggest struggles I've had about confidentiality is not to reveal her recipe for her scones. Because I know if I did, they would be in great demand in every troubled part of the world, and we wouldn't be able to keep up the supply. Now, of course, books don't please everyone, as we have discovered in the last few days. And as Barney said, there's no point in writing it if it's just to please people. I write a book, it's a bit like a sermon. If you want to preach a sermon to please everybody, without, what? Anybody could do that. I thought, why put yourself through all of this? But I ask for forgiveness for those who may feel that I have in any way. I've tried to be hugely sensitive. I've tried to be hugely positive. And if there's any little note of criticism of anybody anywhere, please, particularly if it's you, read it in the context of the whole book. I've tried to offer a tribute as well as a record to what so many people have achieved. I've been privileged to be just a part of this jigsaw, piece by piece. But I hope that others of you, whether you are named or not, will realize that this is a tribute to you. But more importantly, and most importantly of all, I want to think of it as a challenge to myself and to all of us. Whether you agree with everything in this book or not, a challenge to commit ourselves to continue on this journey for a better future, not just for ourselves, but for all those who are to follow. One last word. You'll be glad to know it's the last word. It really is. If by any chance you misread the invitation you got to this evening, I want to make it very clear that Martin and I will be signing, not singing, at the end of this. And for that, you will be profoundly grateful.
Martin and Harold singing. God forbid. God forbid. I was sitting up this morning, about 4 o'clock, Harold, and I was thinking about a conversation I had with Martin a few weeks ago in Cookstown, when he knew at that stage the book was out of his control. And he was doing what we all do when we've written a book and it goes into that place where you can no longer touch it. And I said to him, are you getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and reading your manuscript? Yes. You reading your notes? Yes. You sweating? Yes. And how do you know? Because we've all been there, Martin. And at 4 o'clock this morning when I woke up, Val obviously realized I was having a bit of a think about this evening. And she started to whistle that Jiminy Cricket little number from the Pinocchio film. And I think what she was saying to me was, remember tonight, you're talking about someone who has been the conscience of this process. And that's what you've been, Harold. So annoying a few people, causing that little bit of political unease, forget about it. If it's a newspaper story today, it'll be wrapping somebody's chips by the weekend. You know, the book is there as a record of history. We've got a little bit of time for some comments and a few questions if people would like to ask them. And I'm going to ask Urko Ayerza from the Basque Country to maybe start that this evening, because Urko, we know so much about Harold's role here, but we know how important both he and Father Reid were in the Basque Country. And I wonder, and I see the mic coming there from Morris to you. I'm sorry for ambushing you. I did send you a text about a couple of minutes ago to say, I knew your phone would be off, but I sent you the text anyway to cover me. But Urko Ayerts, just on Harold's role in the Basque Country. Stand up, Urko. And
well, it's a real ambush. I didn't even watch my cell phone, but when I was told that Harold was launching the book, it was clear for me that I had to come. Because, you know, we said in the Basque Country that good friends are done in bad times. Harold came to the Basque Country in our bad times. And he truly offered all we requested to him without any doubt, without any question. He said, yes, I'm doing this. And you will see in the book, he did quite courageous things. And, you know, that was the starting point of a friendship. And for the Basques, when you got a friendship, you need to honor it. And it was a duty for me to come here. Harold was key in some very difficult moments on the moment of the process of disarmament. And he was deeply involved when not so much people was ready to get involved. And so we are very thankful for that. Thank you.
Urko, thank you. I'm not going to ambush anyone else unless someone doesn't put their hand up and ask for a question, and then I will pick someone. Anyone with a question or a comment? My goodness, in a room like this. Tom Hartley, it's your turn.
Good evening, Harold. When I met Harold first, it was up the street in the chaplaincy of the Methodist here at Queen's. And of course we dialogued over years. And in a sense, I, through my own experience and the experience of my friends and colleagues who are here tonight, I always see dialogue really as a very physical thing, affecting the body. So the first stage of dialogue is of the mind, the intellectual. So in essence, you come to it, you rationalize it. But then at some point, it becomes dialogue of the stomach. And in the stomach, we hold the prejudice of our upbringing, of our environment, of our background. And then there's dialogue of the feet. That is, we're in the lion's den. And in that sense, Harold started that process with a few of us when he invited us to have dinner at his home. And in the years of dialogue, and I have spoken to numerous people of, you know, all sorts of politics, but Harold invited us very quickly to his home. It was dialogue of the feet. In other words, he trusted us. He wasn't afraid to bring us into his space. It wasn't about Harold coming to us. He invited us in. And in that sense, his language was the language of inviting people in. And that was the basis of the dialogue. So well done on the book, Harold. I understand what 4 a.m. means. But for me, your friendship, and indeed, there's David Gallagher there and Henry Keyes. These individuals are the real peacemakers. They're very much behind the scenes, but they were, in Barney's words, the roots of a peace process. And thank you.
Maurice, you're pretty close to Sylvia Herman there. Sylvia, would you like to share a few words with us? Sylvia Herman.
Brian, you are very adept at ambushing anybody that you spot in the audience. My reflections on Harold, and I'm delighted and have waited patiently for this book to be published. I think in the quote that I sent through to your co-author, Martin O'Brien, it was, "Hallelujah, I've waited so long." It started with reflections from my late husband, Jack Herman. Jack Herman and Harold Good were great friends, and those were in the days of Corrymeela, long before Jack was Chief Constable. Those were very, very difficult days, and it was hard for Jack to find someone that he could trust, that he could talk to in confidence, and he did with Harold. He was a very, very loyal friend through very difficult times. And then, of course, I had taught here in Queen's, this wonderful institution, and I had the great good fortune of being in the law faculty at the same time as David Trimble. And David Trimble was enormously courageous. I wish we had party leaders of the quality and stature of David Trimble nowadays. And the moment that David Trimble, the late David Trimble, and the late Seamus Mallon and it was Seamus who put his arm around David's shoulders when we had the assembly up and running, when the agreement had been signed and endorsed by thousands of people, north and south. Thank God, and I do mean that, thank God. We're never going back. We're never going back to the violence of those days. And after that very courageous step with Seamus Mallon, John Hume, can I say Martin McGuinness, David Trimble, David Irwin, they're no longer with us. They're no longer with us. We miss them terribly. I decided that I would get involved in politics, and I joined the only party, and the only party, with the only party leader that I trusted, and that was David Trimble, and that was the Ulster Unionist Party. And I remember the act of decommissioning. Sorry, I was laughing as I heard earlier reference to the decommissioning, where the Reverend Alec Reid and Harold Good had been the independent witnesses. And we were invited to go to, or in fact, I think David Trimble insisted upon going to meet Alec Reid and Harold. And Clodagh, as ever, made the scones, ushered us all into the sitting room. Harold was on one side of the fireplace. Alec Reid was on the other side of the fireplace. Alec had his eyes closed. He looked as if he was just quiet contemplation. And David asked for the details of the decommissioning. And he got extremely annoyed. David used to sort of edge towards the edge of the sofa every time he was agitated and annoyed. He kept asking Harold for details of the decommissioning. And of course, Harold said, in no circumstances would he breach confidentiality. And then Alec Reid opened his eyes, and it was as if somebody had pushed the on button. Right, David, what do you want to know? And off he went on this long list of what had been decommissioned. Harold tried valiantly to control him. But that was it. David was convinced about the decommissioning, and so we got the assembly and we carried on. Harold and Clodagh are a wonderful team. 60 years together. How many people? Now, Mary and Martin will see 60 years together. Another remarkable couple. A remarkable couple when Mary would come as president, and we were blessed to have Mary as president for 2 years, 14 years in total. When they would come to, in my case, the constituency North Down, we had Kilcooley, we had loyalists who felt they'd been left out in the cold. And while Mary would come to the town hall to do the formal bit, Martin would go quietly, discreetly, privately to Kilcooley to show recognition to those people who felt they'd been left out in a chill wind. So to be gathered here this evening, we are sitting in one of those memorable, memorable evenings that will never come again, where we have this collection of people to celebrate the launch of this remarkable book that we've waited a long time for. I'm delighted, Mary, that you have been the main speaker this evening, but for everybody else who's contributed, everybody else who's gathered. I mean, we have Michael Longley here, we have Edna here, we have people that represent all corners of this wonderful, wonderful island of ours. It's a celebration of great achievement and the fact we have peace in our lives, peace in our time, which, God willing, we will hand on to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Maurice, I see My eyes aren't as good as they used to be, but I think that's Matt O'Toole and Andrew Muir at the very back of the room. And I think from today's Stormont politicians, it might be worth a thought or two from both of you about the importance of those acts that made the politics possible. Is that you, Andrew, with the microphone?
No problem, Barney. I've been very privileged to be in the front living room on a number of occasions, and the hospitality it's afforded to you as well. And I just want to think it's important we say thank you to Harold for the service he's given to Northern Ireland. I suppose the question I have really around this all is that there's been a lot of engagements that he has had in that living room with different people. And whenever I left, I've probably left with a different perspective, a perspective where I've learned to appreciate the views of others. I think perhaps we could do a bit more about that in Northern Ireland, that we talk but don't listen an awful lot. But the question maybe for Harold is that after those engagements, how did he feel when people left the living room, and what impact did he feel that he had upon the course of history once those people had left that engagement with him?
We'll come to Harold's answer in a moment, but Matt's right beside you there, I think, yeah?
Well, thank you very much, Barney. I wasn't obviously expecting that. You've obviously picked on us, and happy to be picked on. It's testament to the popularity of Harold and Martin and the importance of tonight that this is standing room only. So Andrew and I, through the short straw, I'm extremely privileged to be asked to speak. I just wanted to say, before I say something about Harold, Martin O'Brien, who worked on the book with Harold, is a very old friend of my father, so that's part of the reason I'm here tonight, is because Martin is such a good friend of our family. So I just wanted to acknowledge Martin and his immense achievement. Harold Good is one of those extraordinary people. Whenever you meet him, you just get this radiance of wisdom, decency, and humanity. And the times I've met him, usually at events like this, he's always had something warm and positive to say in just a general and encouraging way, which is very important when you're kind of engaged in politics on a day-to-day basis. So I suppose my question, and it probably relates to what Andrew just asked, is for people like Harold, but also President McAleese and indeed Martin, people who have been through a lot of the last few decades of difficult conversations, the process of reconciliation, the building relationships, which then led to difficult conversations being a little bit less difficult, as President McAleese said. Are there any tips or suggestions you would have for those of us who may have to have some of those more difficult conversations with one another in the years or decades ahead?
Thanks, Matt. And Harold, we'll let you respond to that now about how you felt when your microphone's in front of you there, Harold. How you felt when you had those engagements at home, how you felt when people were leaving. Was it a sense of achievement, of having made some progress? And I suppose Matt's question about, the need for that still today, those conversations.
Yes, I've said in the book that there are 3 T's that are very important, and they are talk, truth, and trust. And I was talking about that one day, and I was talking about how you develop that around a table, a kitchen table, over, with a cup and saucer, and somebody, some wise guy in the audience shouted out, "You've forgotten the 4th T." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Tetleys." And it's when you can create an opportunity and a space where people feel they're just being human with each other. And I was very privileged to observe people becoming human with each other. That was quite remarkable, off stage, off camera, where people could just be people with each other and share very honestly and very openly in a safe space. The fears, the thoughts, the feelings, the anxieties, the prejudices, the problems that they had with each other as well as with those who weren't in the room. And that was how I just felt very privileged to be a part of those conversations, just prompting them now and again. I did very little talking, believe it or not. But I tried to create the space and the atmosphere where people felt they were free to talk with each other and be honest with each other and be human with each other. That above all else, to be human. When you get people talking about their families and their football, that's the first step into conversations that sometimes can be very uncomfortable, but that's the first step.
Thank you, Harold. Any other questions before? Oh yeah, got a question here in the fourth row.
Not a question, a comment from me. My name is Inderjit Bogle. I'm a Methodist minister. I travelled from Sheffield, Harold, not so far as many others, but it's a pleasure to be here. I want to speak as somebody who has sat in John Wesley's chair, a successor to John Wesley. And I want to say on behalf of the entire Methodist Church, thank you, Harold. I first met you when I was 22, when you invited me to come over and support your work in Corrymeela community, and you've been a mentor to me ever since. I look to you as a role model, and I know many others do. There is a line in scripture which says, a prophet is welcome everywhere except in his own home. Well, there might have been people earlier on, Harold, as Dr. Mary reminded us, who felt what you were doing was wrong. But I want to say we are very proud of you. And Harold is a recipient of the World Methodist Peace Award from 80 million people who are Methodists around the world, an accolade and a recognition of the contribution of this man. So, Harold, on behalf of the Methodist Church throughout the world, I think I can legitimately say that. Thank you. We are very proud of you.
Anyone else? Just here, Brian in the second row. Morris, he waited until you got to the very back before he stuck his hand up. Brian McKee.
Thank you. I just realised a strange connection between Martin and Harold. About 20 years ago, I was director of youth ministry in the diocese here. And as a result of that, every so often you'd be invited to appear on the Sunday sequence. Friday night, 5 p.m, Stewart's Supermarket in Ballymena, my wife and I standing with a large trolley of food and Martin O'Brien on the phone. Brian, there is a film being released tonight in QFT. It's a very controversial film. We're going to cover it on Sunday. Will you go to see it? I says, Martin, you've told me the title of it. No, I'm not going to see it. He says, but we don't want someone talking about it if they haven't been to see it. Link with Harold. Peacemaking. Many people talk the talk, but you also need to walk the walk. And in my time, in my small efforts at peacemaking, Harold has been one of the inspirations. And a few years back, Father Gary Donegan and I were at a conference in Los Angeles speaking on peacemaking. And one of the keynote speakers was Mark Shriver, the grandnephew of John F. Kennedy. And he was speaking about a book he had just released on the life story of his father. Very simple title, A Good Man. Tonight, I think, has been an absolute privilege to be in company of a good man. So much so, this afternoon I'm power washing my back garden covered in dirt. I'm putting together my speech for the AGM for the Parish Gaelic Club. What am I going to say? And tonight I've got the answer. be true to yourself. If you have a vision, speak to it. Not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. So tonight, Harold, thank you for the privilege of being in the company of a good man.
I think I spotted Gladys Gagnon somewhere just a little bit earlier. Gladys, are you there? Oh, she's maybe no. No? Did I see Gladys? No. No. Yeah. Yeah. There are others with their hands up here.
Sorry, my name is Ed Peterson. I work in Clonard Monastery. I'm here with Father Peter Burns, and I think following what Inderjit said on behalf of the Methodist Church, we in Clonard and the Redemptorist community and the Catholic Church, not only here in Northern Ireland and Ireland and across the world, and I think Pope Francis would be with me in saying a most sincere word of thanks to Harold, especially for his friendship with Father Alec Reid and how much that meant to the community in Clonard. And Father Jerry Reynolds often describes himself as Father Alec's altar boy or altar server. And I think for many of us here, we no longer have Father Alec with us, but the great privilege to be an altar server, an altar boy for you, Harold, now that we have your book. It will be a great challenge to us. And finally, John Wesley and the founder of the Redemptorists, Alphonsus Liguori, were often seen as, many called them almost spiritual twins in a sense. And I think for us in Clonard, you and Father Alec were such a great blessing to us and carry something of that spirit for many new generations. And we really look forward to reading your book, and you will always have a special home in Clonard Monastery. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. We're running out of time, and Martin and Harold need a little bit more time to sing and sign the book. I just want to say one last big thank you to you, Harold, from a very personal point of view. Foul jokes about, have you had your supervision with Harold this week? Your counselling, and you've helped me on many, many occasions think my way through difficult moments, and I will never forget that. You know that you've always been there for me. So just that final personal thank you. I want to call Eileen O'Brien forward. I think there's one last. Yeah, I think that's what it is, Eileen. Yeah. It's not for me, I don't think. Martin, just hold for 1 second. I've just been told that Harold's cousin Vivian would like to say a few words, so we'll give Vivian the last word, and then Harold and Martin will be available to sign the book, and there'll be tea and coffee and plenty of time to chat among each other, or with each other, I should say.
I have the great privilege of being Harold's cousin. And our relationship goes back not just because we're cousins, but because we've been friends. And that goes back a lot longer than the 60 years that I've known him and Clodagh together. Many, many great tributes have been paid to him. We're very proud of Harold. And many tributes have been paid to him, rightly so. But the tribute I'd like to pay to Harold tonight is to say that all through those many years that we've been friends and cousins and soldiered and talked, he has remained unchanged. We still share and laugh about things that happened a great many years ago. And that's a great tribute because he has been showered with so much. And for him to keep as he is, loved and beloved by us and by our family, that's our tribute. And we're so proud of you, Harold. Thank you.
Vivian, thank you very much. And just one final thank you from you all to Harold for tonight, for his book, and for all that he has done for us.